It gives me great pleasure to be here today with Michael Fortier, Minister of Public Works, Rob Nicholson, Government House Leader, Pierre Poilievre, Parliamentary Secretary for the Treasury Board, Minister of Justice Vic Taves, and of course the President of the Treasury Board, John Baird, to announce that our government is moving ahead with the first of the commitments contained in the throne speech, namely making the federal government more accountable. Today tabled in Parliament the new Federal Accountability Act, a bill which contains a large number of measures aimed at cleaning up the federal government. Once implemented, this act will put an end to the influence of big money in federal political parties, stop former ministers, ministerial staffers, and senior public officials from using their insider connections to profit from public service, offer ironclad protection to whistleblowers, give the Auditor General the power to follow the money trail as it relates to federal grants and contributions, clean up government appointments, contracts, polling, and advertising, extend the scope of the Access to Information Act, and establish an independent parliamentary budget office. Simply put, these and other measures will change the way business is done in Ottawa forever. They will replace the culture of entitlement that took root under the previous government with a culture of accountability. This is the promise we made to Canadians, and today we are delivering on that commitment. And this is just the beginning. For in the months ahead, our government is going to work hard to deliver broad-based tax relief, starting by cutting the GST, crack down on crime, crack down on gun, gang, and drug crime, help all Canadian families with young children by introducing a new choice in childcare allowance, and reduce wait times for medically necessary treatments by working with the provinces to develop a patient wait times guarantee. These are the priorities of our government because they are the priorities of ordinary, working Canadians and their families.
The opposition.
Mr. Speaker, we learned today in iPolitics that over the past 8 years, the Prime Minister's aircraft was used as a taxi for Conservative fundraisers. Mark Kinn raised $3.6 million for the Prime Minister's leadership campaigns and millions of dollars more for the Conservative Party. What was Mark Kinn doing aboard government aircraft, and why were taxpayers stuck with the bill? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the RCMP is tasked with ensuring the safety and security of the Prime Minister, and they recommend that the Prime Minister not take commercial aircraft. At the same time, Mr. Speaker, the Conservative Party obviously has reduced the use of Challenger aircraft and the costs thereof by 75% since the Liberals were in power, Mr. Speaker.
That's my favorite answer from the Conservatives. We're not quite as crooked as the Liberals used to be. Quite a measure of government probity, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister has stuck taxpayers with the bill for nearly $120,000 in flights on the government's jet by their party's bagmen. Why is the Prime Minister's plane being used as a perk to reward Conservative Party bagmen?
Of course, Mr. Speaker, as I just said, the RCMP are in charge of the Prime Minister's security. They, of course, recommend that the Prime Minister does not fly a commercial, Mr. Speaker. Obviously, when the Prime Minister travels on Conservative Party business, those costs are reimbursed to the taxpayer, Mr. Speaker. That's a policy that this Prime Minister brought into place, Mr. Speaker. I'm proud of the fact that this government has, of course, reduced the use of Challengers by some 75% in comparison to the previous Liberal government. At the same time, Mr. Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition might want to explain why he's charging taxpayers for offices across this country where he has no members of Parliament, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, the Chief Conservative Whip confirmed yesterday that the NDP has followed all the rules. What we're talking about is the Prime Minister not following. Conservative fundraisers are rewarded with expensive flights on the Prime Minister's private plane. Lincoln bedroom, anyone? Reimbursing $260 for a private jet from Calgary to Ottawa? Come on. This is exactly the sort of corruption the Prime Minister used to rail against when it was the Liberals flying around on government jets with their buddies. When will the Conservatives take responsibility for the latest abuse of taxpayers' money?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Prime
Thank you,
Minister.
Mr. Speaker. As I just said, Mr. Speaker, we've reduced the use of challengers by some 75%. Mr. Speaker, this Prime Minister is the Prime Minister who brought in new rules that he would pay back the taxpayers for the use of the Challenger when it wasn't for government business, Mr. Speaker. That's something new. At the same time, we see the NDP, they're starting to use offices across this country in areas to help MPs where they actually have no members of Parliament, Mr. Speaker. They send out potentially illegal mailings to the people of Brandon Souris, to the people of Barassa, Mr. Speaker. They accepted illegal contributions from their union buddies, Mr. Speaker. On every single matter that counts, they're always breaking the rules and getting caught.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Defeated Conservative candidate appointed to the Senate by the Prime Minister, another one under investigation. A new audit from KPMG has found that spending safeguards in the Senate are still, quote, significantly deficient. The Senate still lacks proper documentation to keep track of tens of millions of dollars in spending approved in this House every year. If the Senate can't even keep track of its own spending, why do Liberals and Conservatives in this House keep voting to give them $100 million a year of taxpayers' money?
Parliamentary Secretary to the Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Of course, last June, the Senate did bring in some new measures with respect to accountability in the Senate. Mr. Speaker, in the fall, we were fighting tooth and nail on this side of the House to bring accountability measures into the Senate. It was the opposition who fought tooth and nail against those reforms, Mr. Speaker. We brought in a number of reforms that are presently in front of the Supreme Court of Canada to reform the Senate, to make it more effective, Mr. Speaker. And, of course, we expect not only our senators, but members of Parliament and the party leaders to ensure that the funds that they use on behalf of taxpayers are used responsibly, that they follow the rules, and not just the letter of the law, but the spirit of the law. I'll ask him to reflect on that before he opens up offices in areas where he has no members of Parliament.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition. In fact, Mr. Speaker, KPMG discovered that senators are still using their good old system that allows senators to audit themselves. The rules are inadequate, procedures are not being followed, and at the end of the day, it is still the same people, taxpayers, who must pay. This is a farce, Mr. Speaker. When will Conservatives stop subsidizing Senate abuse with taxpayers' money? Honourable Parliamentary.
Namely, making the federal government more accountable. We tabled in Parliament the new Federal Accountability Act, a bill which contains a large number of measures aimed at cleaning up the federal government. Once implemented, this act will put an end to the influence of big money in federal political parties, stop former ministers, ministerial staffers, and senior public officials from using their insider connections to profit from public service, clean up government appointments, contracts, polling, and advertising. Simply put, these and other measures will change the way business is done in Ottawa forever. And they will replace the culture of entitlement that took root under the previous government with a culture of accountability. This is the promise we made to Canadians, and today we are delivering on that commitment. And this is just the beginning. These are the priorities of our government because they are the priorities of ordinary, hard-working Canadians and their families.